California Girls from the Beach Boys, a track from the fall of 1965, is maybe one of the first signals that we get in the history of popular music that the surf music that the Beach Boys had done up to that point was now getting much more ambitious and in many ways much more interesting, as Brian Wilson stopped touring with the group, who toured almost non-stop, really. These guys were out there on the road, and he stopped touring with them and stayed at home and worked on the albums while the rest of the band went out and toured the country singing their hits and building up the popularity and maintaining the popularity of the group. So you had this instance where Brian was at home working on the recordings and the guys were out playing the hits on the road, which meant that most of the musicians that played on those Beach Boys recordings from here on out were going to be studio musicians, and they were the studio musicians who had worked with Phil Spector. Brian Wilson was very much influenced by Phil Spector and Phil Spector's production technique, and so he even went into the studio and saw how Phil did things and then took those back to the studio he was working in and tried to use a lot of those same techniques, and of course using some of the same musicians. We can begin to see some of the ambition that occurs in this song California Girls, still mixed in with a lot of the characteristics of surf music. We can begin to see that ambitious stuff right from the very introduction of the song. The song starts out with an introduction that's 12 measures long, and the first 10 measures of it use a harp and a 12-string guitar, and then there's a great use of the brass, the horns, to create an almost kind of orchestral kind of opening to the tune. And then, of course, it locks in to the beat of the song as it's going to go, using an almost kind of what I call a Happy Trails bass line in terms of the way the bass goes. Sounds like the beginning of that old cowboy song, Happy Trails. You get two verses and a chorus, and it's very interesting to see how in the verses it's not so unlike the surf tunes talking about how all the girls around the world are great, but I wish they could all be California girls. Very much a kind of a surfing tune, right? Cars, girls, or surfing. In this case, it's the song's about girls. But there's a fantastic kind of antiphonal relationship, a sort of back and forth relationship between the voices, where some of the voices sing a line and other voices respond to that back and forth during the chorus, that really sort of shows a continued development of the Beach Boys' vocal style. So you get two verses and a chorus with the fancy vocals I was just talking about. That's repeated again, two more verses and a chorus, and just about the point where we would get the re-beginning. Remember Be My Baby, and the way Hal Blaine comes back in with that drum beat that started that tune to kind of re-begin it again. We get the same kind of thing here with a little interlude that sounds an awful lot like the introduction, and then it fades with the chorus. So you can really see not only the growing ambition of surf music in this tune, but also the way in which Brian Wilson uses the studio to create sounds that he might not be able to get any other way, certainly not in a live setting. It starts to bring in a lot of different kinds of instruments that hadn't been a part of what he was doing with his surf music. It's increasingly ambitious, increasingly creative, still within the frame really of surf music, and we see the real legacy of Phil Spector beginning to play itself out at a time when Phil Spector is maybe starting to falter a little bit himself on the charts. Brian Wilson and the Beach Boys are just starting to pick up steam, and of course, before long, it's going to be Pet Sounds and Good Vibrations.